Ulm, Germany, November 10th, 1619. A 23-year-old soldier shuts himself alone in a small room, sealed against the winter by a single cast-iron stove. He has told no one what he's doing in there. What happens that night will get labeled, centuries later, the birth of modern philosophy. His name is Rene Descartes, and by morning he will have dreamed 3 dreams he believes are a divine sign. That he must tear down everything he thinks he knows and rebuild certainty from a single unshakable point. History remembers Descartes as the coldest, most mathematical mind of his century, the man who reduced the universe to extension and motion, animals to clockwork, and doubt to a method. What almost nobody remembers is that 17 years later, when he sat down to explain how to actually live while his reasoning was still under construction, he reached for the oldest trick in Stoic philosophy. In 1637 Discourse on the Method, tucked between his geometry and his optics, Descartes writes a short, strange chapter almost nobody assigns in philosophy class. A provisional morality to live by until reason finishes its work. 2 of its 3 rules are, almost word for word, the opening lines of Epictetus's Enchiridion, a slave's handbook on what is and isn't up to us. A Jesuit-trained mathematician and a crippled ex-slave, 17 centuries apart, arrive at the exact same emergency instructions for the human mind. To see why Descartes needed Stoic armor before his own method was even finished, we have to go back, not to the stove, but to a slave's hut in Nicopolis, where the rule he borrowed was written first. If you've watched this series before, you already know Epictetus. Born a slave around 55 AD, crippled by his own master, who taught that only one thing is ever truly ours, our own judgments. Everything else, our body, our reputation, other people's opinions of us, Epictetus called not up to us and told his students to stop treating it like it was. Now meet the other man in this story. Rene Descartes, born in 1596 into a France torn by religious war, a soldier turned mathematician obsessed with one question: can I know anything with total certainty at all? On paper, these 2 men have almost nothing in common. Epictetus distrusted books and systems. Descartes built an entire philosophy out of geometric proofs. Epictetus taught in a rented room to whoever showed up. Descartes corresponded with queens and hid his most controversial book rather than publish it. But both men opened their life's work with the exact same emergency question. Given that I cannot control the outside world, and given that my own reasoning might currently be untrustworthy, what do I do right now today while I figure the rest out? Epictetus answered that question with the dichotomy of control. Descartes answered it, almost 2,000 years later, with what he explicitly called a morale par provision, a provisional morality. Neither man was willing to wait for perfect certainty before living. Both built a stopgap, and Descartes' stopgap borrows Epictetus's furniture almost item for item. If you followed this series through Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, you're about to watch their ideas walk straight into the birth of modern rationalism. Stick around, and if this bridge between 2 eras surprises you as much as it surprised us, let us know in the comments which philosopher you didn't expect to show up here. Descartes lays out his provisional morality in exactly 3 maxims, and he's explicit about why. He is about to doubt literally everything, and a man mid-demolition still has to live somewhere. The first maxim is almost throat-clearing. Obey the laws and customs of your country and the moderate opinions of the most sensible people around you. Practical, unremarkable, easy to skip past. The second and third maxims are where it stops sounding like housekeeping and starts sounding like Epictetus with a French accent. Maxim 2. Be as firm and resolute in my actions as I could be, and follow even doubtful opinions, once adopted, with the same constancy as if they were quite certain. That is a direct answer to the paralysis of not knowing. Commit anyway, act anyway, because indecision is its own kind of harm. Maxim 3 is the one that matters most for this video. Try always to conquer myself rather than fortune, and to change my desires rather than the order of the world. Read that again slowly. Descartes is telling himself in 1637 to stop trying to control outcomes and start controlling only his own wanting, which is, word for word, the opening move of Epictetus's Enchiridion. Some things are up to us, and some are not. Descartes even reaches for the same metaphor Stoics loved. He compares himself to a traveler lost in a forest, who should pick one direction and walk it firmly, rather than wander in circles waiting for certainty that will never come. A 17th century mathematician just told you, in his own words, to stop trying to control what you can't and start disciplining what you can. If that sentence could sit comfortably in a Stoic handbook, that's because it basically already did. Tell us below if you've caught yourself living by this rule without knowing where it came from. In 1643, Descartes begins corresponding with Princess Elisabeth of Bohemia, exiled, in debt, watching her family's fortunes collapse, and suffering what her own doctors call a nervous, wasting illness brought on by grief. She writes to Descartes not for equations. She writes to him because she is in genuine psychological pain, and she has heard he might know how to think his way out of it. Descartes' answer is astonishing if you know what came before it. He tells her more or less to go read Seneca. In a letter from 1645, Descartes walks Elisabeth through Seneca's De Vita Beta, on the happy life, line by line, correcting and refining Seneca's arguments like a man doing philosophical physical therapy. His prescription, stripped down: happiness cannot depend on anything outside your own judgment and will, because anything outside your judgment and will can be taken from you. He tells Elisabeth to separate her genuine misfortunes, real losses, real illness, from the additional suffering she is generating by wishing those facts were otherwise. That is not a paraphrase for this video. That is, functionally, the Stoic distinction between the impression and the judgment about the impression, the exact mental move Epictetus taught 2,000 years earlier. Descartes isn't doing philosophy for a printer or a church censor here. He is doing it for one suffering, specific person, and the tool he reaches for is Stoic. The most famous rationalist in history used Stoic reasoning as literal bedside medicine for a grieving princess. If someone in your life is carrying something they can't control, this is the kind of reasoning Descartes handed Elisabeth, worth passing on. Share this video with them. So far, this has been Descartes borrowing Stoic tools to survive the gap before his method was finished. Now here's where it gets structural, not just quotable. Descartes' famous method of doubt: reject anything you can possibly doubt, no matter how small the chance of error looks on its surface, like the opposite of Stoic acceptance. But look at what the doubt is actually for. It isn't nihilism. It's a filter, a discipline for clearing out unreliable impressions to find the one thing that survives. Stoic philosophy has an almost identical internal move called prosach, the discipline of attention, or the discipline of assent. Don't accept every impression as true, examine it first, and withhold judgment until you know it's trustworthy. Epictetus drilled this constantly. Marcus Aurelius practiced it daily in his journal. Judge only what is actually within your control and refuse the rest, no matter how convincing it feels. Descartes runs that exact discipline on knowledge itself. Senses can lie, so distrust them. Dreams feel real, so distrust waking certainty too. Even math could be a demon's trick, so distrust that as well. And then famously, he finds the one thing that survives every round of doubt: The fact that he is doubting thinking at all. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. That's a Stoic-shaped move wearing a geometer's clothes. Strip away everything unreliable and build outward from the one point you can actually stand on. Both traditions are running the same operation. Stoics on your judgments, Descartes on your knowledge. Filter out what you can't trust and act only from what's left. If you've noticed you already do a version of this filtering in your own life, tell us where in the comments. Here's where the resemblance ends, and it ends hard on the single biggest question either philosophy ever asked. What is a human being actually made of? The Stoics were strict materialists. Even the soul for them was a physical substance, a fine, fiery breath called pneuma, woven through the body and through the entire rational cosmos, no exceptions. Descartes says the opposite. Mind and body are two completely different substances. Res cogitans, the thinking thing, and res extensa, the extended thing, that don't share a nature at all. For a Stoic, your body is regulated by the same rational fire that runs the universe. For Descartes, your body is a machine, literally, explicitly, a clockwork mechanism, no different in kind from a fountain or a mill. That single move, dualism instead of monism, changes everything downstream, including what you're supposed to do about your emotions. The strict Stoic goal was apatheia, the elimination of the passions entirely, because a passion is a false judgment about what's good or bad, and a wise person doesn't make that mistake. Descartes, in his final book, The Passions of the Soul, explicitly disagrees. Passions aren't judgment errors to delete. They are useful signals from the body machine to be well managed and correctly aimed, not suppressed. It's a near-medical, almost biomechanical view of emotion. Descartes genuinely believed you could trace passions to physiology, centuries before anyone had the vocabulary of neuroscience to check his work. So the borrowing has a hard edge. Descartes takes the Stoic operating system for handling uncertainty and runs it on completely different hardware. Which side do you find more convincing? A universe that's all one rational substance, or a mind and body built from two different materials entirely? Argue it out in the comments. Strip away the metaphysics for a second, and both systems are running the same shaped machine. Take a flood of raw input, apply a filter, and only act on what passes. For the Stoics, the filter question is this actually up to me? For Descartes, the filter question is, can this actually survive doubt? Different questions, identical architecture. Some modern commentators have noticed this structure shows up literally everywhere reasoning under uncertainty happens, including, perhaps not coincidentally, in how we build software. In object-oriented programming, encapsulation means exactly this. Hide what's internal and unreliable, expose only the interface you can trust, and never let outside noise corrupt your internal state. A Stoic ignoring gossip to protect their judgment, and a class hiding its private fields to protect its invariance, are doing structurally the same operation, 17 or 2,000 years apart from each other, and from the code. That's not a coincidence you should find comforting, exactly. It's a coincidence you should find clarifying. Good filtering isn't a personality trait. It's a repeatable design pattern for surviving uncertain input, and every era rediscovers it in its own vocabulary. Epictetus called it the dichotomy of control. Descartes called it methodical doubt. You might just call it not reading the comments before you've finished the argument. 3 different vocabularies, 1 design pattern. Isolate what you can verify, discard or quarantine the rest, and only build on the part that survived the filter. If you build systems for a living, you've been running a Stoic Cartesian filter your whole career without a name for it. Now you have 3. Comment with the version you actually use day to day. We want to see how many different vocabularies the same idea is hiding under. Go back one last time to that sealed, stove-heated room in 1619. A 23-year-old soldier, alone, trying to figure out how to think at all. He didn't have a finished philosophy that night. What he had, and what he'd keep needing for the next 20 years, was a Stoic emergency kit borrowed from a slave who'd been dead for over a millennium. That is the actual, underreported story of the birth of modern rationalism. It didn't spring fully formed from pure geometry. It leaned on Stoic scaffolding until the building could stand on its own. Descartes' physics is mostly wrong now. His pineal gland theory of mind-body interaction didn't survive contact with actual anatomy. Even his dualism is a minority position among philosophers today. But the provisional morality, conquer yourself rather than fortune, change your desires rather than the order of the world, that survived everything. It reads like it was written yesterday, because Epictetus wrote a version of it 2,000 years before Descartes did, and it was already timeless then. That's the real pattern across this entire series, not just this video. The specific systems, Stoic physics, Cartesian mechanism, whatever the current neuroscience says, keep getting revised or discarded. The practical operating instructions: filter what you can't verify, act firmly on what you can, stop wasting force on what was never yours to move. Those keep getting rediscovered instead, by people who often don't even know they are rediscovering anything. Descartes thought he was building something entirely new in that room. He was also, without quite realizing it, keeping something very old alive. You don't need to resolve the dualism debate to use the one rule both men actually agreed on. Stop trying to control the world and start disciplining what you actually can: your own judgment, your own doubt, your own next action. Pick one thing this week that isn't up to you and let it go on purpose. If this series has changed how you think about an old idea showing up in a new coat, subscribe for the next bridge we build, and tell us in the comments, which two thinkers centuries apart do you want us to connect next?